Greetings, everyone, and welcome to The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Welcome to Black Clock Audio Tales. This is kind of a smashed together episode of the two, because we're going to be talking about cosmic horror, we're going to be referencing literature, but we're also going to be talking about role-playing games, writing, occultism, all kinds of stuff. And it's under the umbrella of Delta Green, an RPG that Ken Hite, who is the author of The Fall of Delta Green, just recently won an Emmy at Gen Con. We'll go into that. And Adam Scott Glancy, one of the originators of the Delta Green system. And they're going to be talking about it. And Scott's got some great stories. He's going to talk about all kinds of things. Ken's going to talk about all kinds of things. Ken's going to talk about the basics of The Fall of Delta Green. Scott's going to talk about the basics of Delta Green in general, original flavor. We're going to talk about how they run games. They're going to talk about what they think people should know about running games. And kind of like, if you really want to write a good kind of espionage story, or you want to run a good Delta Green game, this is how to do it. This is also authors to check out, and just stuff like that. So this isn't one of our reading episodes, and this isn't one of our People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos episodes. This is somewhere in between. This is kind of a how to get good at gaming and also understand gaming setting, I guess. I think I called it a system earlier. I meant to say setting. Mea culpa. So hey, let's jump in feet first. Geronimo, and remember to, fold your legs and turn to the side as you fall so you don't break your legs. All right. Yeah. And special thanks again to Adam Scott Glancy and Ken Hite, and also Kevin MacLeod for letting me butcher his music so I can use it. All right. Let's get on with the show. People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos and Black Clock Audio Tales start now. Okay, and once again, in more ways than one, we have Adam Scott Glancy of Pagan Publishing, and who all are you affiliated with these days?
Well, these days, yes, I'm still the last surviving Legionnaire at Fort Pagan here in Seattle, and we do have a few projects that we're trying to get out. These days, I'm doing most of my writing for, I guess, the Delta Green Partnership, which is how the Delta Green authors have formed themselves into a little collective, and we're currently being published through Arc Dream Publishing. Mostly it's and Arc Dream does all kinds of stuff, but I'm only involved with their Delta Green writing.
Cool. So today I wanted to talk to you about one of the things that I think is really kind of neat, something that's been done with the Cthulhu Mythos and RPGs, is Delta Green. In some ways it feels like this uphill battle that I'll let you talk about it, because you're way better at this than I am.
Yeah, I get I get that there would seem to be a bit of a conflict there in trying to make those two things happen, because D&D taught us that role-playing games were about killing the monster and taking their stuff. It was all heroic, escapist, and acquisitional, really. That's sort of the roots of the whole thing. It came out of wargaming. Sure. As opposed to, storytelling. The whole point was, again, to always get better, always strive for higher excellence of your character, hone your instrument so that you can tackle bigger and better problems. The thing about Call of Cthulhu was the idea that, one of the many things about it, there's kind of a J curve as far as how tough things are and how hard things are to deal with, where you've got some cultists and you've got some deep ones and you've got some ghouls, and those are all basically whackable. You can hit them with your axe, you can stab them with your sword cane, you can mow them down with your Tommy gun, but at some point, very quickly, it moves into, the physical universe doesn't really affect this thing because they're part from a place where the laws and physics of our universe don't apply. They're five-dimensional beings, they're from some dark corner of the cosmos that we don't understand yet. So, you can only hurt them with a a kind of math that we understand as magic.
Yeah.
Okay, and did we mention that the only weapon you have to hurt them with also will damage you and short the life of your character?
Yeah,
I get that. I get that. That is how you do it. And how do you make Cosmic Horror playable? There are plenty of people who will not pick up Call of Cthulhu and grouse strangely though, you can't win.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you can win. You can win. You just have to accept that winning does not always mean throw the ring into Mount Doom and Sauron's tower falls over with that big flaming eye on top looking really surprised. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about Sauron's tower falling over in Lord of the Rings. That eye is very expressive as he's on the way down, and it's literally going, what, hold it, wait a minute, wait, boom, does not see that coming at all. It's completely surprised. Well, guess what, kids? You can't do that to the mythos because the mythos isn't a thing. It's everything.
Yeah.
It's how the universe works. It's the uncaring, unemotional, impersonal physics and realities of the universe where you're just not that important. And, some people aren't going to want to, go figure, somebody's not going to necessarily want to role play that. But for me, and it was certainly something that Ken Hite pointed out years ago, is that for him, Call of Cthulhu was sort of like the classic dichotomy of the Western. And in the Western, there are all these uncivilized, barbarous powers out there in the West, whether it's the Indians, as, demonstrated by the sort of racist depictions of Indians, from the 1940s and 50s, or it's the banditos, or it's the cattle baron who's going to take everything you own because he's got a bunch of guys with guns who can do that, or it's just the local hood, like Liberty Valance. Mm-hmm. These things are in opposition to democracy and law and order and safety and prosperity. But the only thing that can stop them is more barbarism, more violence. They can't be reasoned with or dealt with or talked down. You have to force them. And ultimately that means appealing to people who have the capacity to get things done through violence. But that sets up the problem of in your classic Western of the person who defends civilization is not wholly welcomed by civilization. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's one of Gary Cooper's problems in High Noon, is that the solution that he proposes to fix Frank Miller is not welcome by the townspeople, not the least of which because they could get their hair messed up, but also because they seem to think that, well, we're civilized now. We're not going to have a shootout in the street with a armed gangster and his thugs. That's not good. Yeah, it is. It's going to happen.
That sounds like your problem, Sheriff.
Yeah. And for Call of Cthulhu, you're playing a game where the players are those people who are defending civilization and defending human life against the outer dark, against the reality of the mythos. They're allowing civilization to proceed with its comfortable illusions about man's place at the center of the universe, about man's role as greatest tenant of the earth, and ignoring the real history and the real size and scope of the universe, and getting about their day of raising kids and going to work and whatever in peace. And because the players have had this brush with the mythos, with the outer dark, they are not really welcome anymore. They're the weirdos now. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who carry this taint because what some call madness, they call clarity, and they can see not just what the problem is, but what the price is going to be for facing the problem. It is a kind of heroics that is thankless and does not involve it being enriched. The idea in Call of Cthulhu that, we've got the sorcerer's orb, that's like, hooray, we have a hand grenade with the pin pulled. Yeah. I wonder how long the fuse is. You don't, generally want to have the stuff you pick up off the mythos, and using it is usually to your detriment in some fashion. It's always This stuff is always expensive, and it's only not expensive if you're a sociopath. It's like, well, we can totally, predict the stock market as long as we keep murdering virgins. That's cool, right? We'll always be able to pick the right stocks as long as we pour the blood of a virgin over this this head covered in oil and this brazen head. It'll be fine. What's a virgin now and again? We'll only use it a couple times a year, and there are going to be people who, in our world, who are always going to vote for, sure, what's one person I don't care about, more or less. And that's sort of the thing that we always did when we were doing the mythos, was less about cosmic forces looking to destroy mankind, because I don't think they're looking to destroy mankind. They're just, the cosmic forces of the mythos just exist. And mankind is an afterthought, or even not even noticed. But humans trying to use the mythos to get what they want, trying to tap into this alien science called magic to better themselves, and in doing so, opening doorways into our dimensions for other things that are wreaking havoc and causing death and destruction. But it's okay, because they've managed to, I don't know, corner the silver market, or get themselves elected president, or just make Jenny from the chemistry class like them, or whatever pathetic thing it is that they want to have done. No matter what the casualty rate is to the rest of the world. Cosmic horror, that is, that's a little less cosmic, because it's down in this point where humanity hits that cosmic horror. That is that idea that we are insignificant and young and tiny, and that we are standing in the total perspective vortex, and we're surviving because we're not paying attention to it. Real cosmic horror is the kind of thing that should demonstrate sort of man's insignificance and the ubiquity and perhaps inevitable destruction of all things. But the thing is, we knew that. In some ways, cosmic horror is slightly undercut by the idea that we knew that. We knew the sun's going to swell up into a red giant and eat the earth eventually. But again, it won't happen in multiple lifetimes. I don't even know if we'll be the same species we are in that many millions of years. I mean, it's been about 2 million, I guess, we've been knocking around.
Yeah.
Who knows what we're going to be like in 60, 70 million years. It'll be that's a problem for transhuman Scott, who isn't here yet. He'll have to, it or they or whatever we're doing with gender in 65 million years. We'll have to deal with that. Not me. But yeah, I mean, Sandy Peterson has said out loud that when he was designing Call of Cthulhu, he sort of designed it as the anti-role-playing game. Yeah. Where it wasn't really designed to acquire things and get better. It was designed for sort of hilarious one-shots where you go out and you get stepped on by the monsters. I kind of disagree with that. I feel that you can do a campaign, and if you can, and one of the things that we added to Call of Cthulhu, which was one of the big things missing, is when we did the Delta Green rules, we created a sequence where we forced the players, as part of the mechanics, sort of forced them to have family and friends and contacts and people they're involved with. Yeah. So that you are not just doing this stuff for a bunch of anonymous rubes out there in the world. You have mothers and fathers and brothers and all the contacts. You save the world for them. Mm-hmm. Even if you can't conceive of all of humanity, you're saving the world for the people you know. That has become sort of a mechanical, a very important mechanical focus for the Delta Green game. I hope I answered that question.
I don't even know if that was a question. We were just talking.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was something about how do you roleplay Cosmic Horror, and I think I got around that somehow.
Okay, I guess what my question is like, I really like the concept of going from like antiquarians and dilettantes and tribal fishermen to DEA agents or Canadian Royal Mounted Police, or and like someone who has like training and stuff like that, and it's still just as fruitless.
Yeah, well, that was something we the idea behind Delta Green, when I think when John Tynes was first coming up with the concept for Delta Green was he wasn't interested in power gamer fantasy. You're not going to get to be Jason Bourne and parkour off parkour around the city of Relia, and deftly attach the C4 to the back of Cthulhu's head and blow him up. That's not going to happen. As far as I'm concerned, it's still just what's it, 1d4 investigators per round or whatever the kill numbers were on Cthulhu back in the original stats in the Call of Cthulhu book.
Yeah.
But that's not what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do is definitely add the idea to take professional investigators. And we wanted to sort of professionalize that a little bit, not the least of which because investigations do professionalize in the 20th century. The idea of talented amateurs being able to assist the police in the 1920s and 30s is not that far off. It's not that insane when you look at the state of what law enforcement looked like.
Oh, yeah.
In that period of time, it's often a family business. It's often how somebody who's popular in the county gets himself elected sheriff and then hires all of his cousins and nephews who are big enough and mean enough to do the job and perhaps not competent enough to get a job doing anything else. And those are your police. That's your sheriff's department. All, 6 of them for an entire county. And the idea of, some our chemists or our archaeologists are coming in and being able to assist in analyzing a crime scene is not that insane.
Yeah.
Even not every police department is the London police. I mean,
yeah.
Scotland Yard is insanely advanced for the 1920s. Most police departments in America, we haven't even gotten to things like your Miranda rights and a right not to have the living shit beat out of you in a back room, to get a confession. That stuff hasn't even come up yet. So that's how police departments operate. Anyways, the modern age is going to be tougher. It's going to be a lot tougher to basically assume that the cops are so incompetent that they're going to blow it. Now, I was just listening to an article in the Atlantic about the backlog of rape kits in Cleveland, and when they finally went and got into them, after letting them sit for years, they suddenly discovered that all their goddamn rapes were being committed by serial rapists. That there was just, that there were more of them than you could imagine, and as opposed to one-off events. And the guys who commit acquaintance rape, date rape tonight. Oh, they also rape strangers. They've been raping the whole time. They rape people they don't know. They rape people they do know. And our police departments have utterly failed to, investigate this sort of crime. When it comes to, not saying the police departments are all competent now or not subject to their own sort of bureaucratic inertia about just clear the numbers. Whereas the professor and the antiquarian and these guys were the guys delving into weird areas of information and being able to correlate their contents enough to go, oh shit, Sobek is actually an avatar of Nyarlathotep or whatever they're discovering. Intelligence and law enforcement people have access to this vast array of information now, particularly even more so here in the digital age. And they're the ones who could be at the point where they correlate the contents and realize, why does this symbol always show up at these crime scenes? Or, what's this strange, this drug seems to be turning up at the, over and over again. And it's funny how this dance club is all Egyptian themed or whatever it is that they're doing. They're going to piece together the information that's going to provide the leads and the clues to get you into a game. What we wanted to do with Delta Green was make sure that, certainly what John wanted to do is make sure that it didn't turn into a power fantasy. So when we first created Delta Green, we made sure Delta Green was disbanded. It had been defunded and didn't work anymore. It was a OSS, Office of Strategic Services, World War II program designed to counter the Nazis' interest in occult and supernatural weapon systems. The Americans knew that shit was real because, according to Lovecraft, America had gotten their first encounter with the mythos back in 1928 with the Shadow of Innsmouth. So they know that's real. They know that fish people are real. That opens the door to all kinds of things. So by 1942, Delta Green's fighting the good fight against the mythos. It tries to, sometimes not very well, but it eventually is disbanded in 1968, according to our timeline, due to sort of a mythos version of the Bay of Pigs. They fuck up an operation and they're disbanded. So when the players come in the 90s, they're just like literally a secret society inside the federal government based around the remnants of this old program, using some of the names of the old program, using some of the techniques, but they don't have a headquarters. They don't have a volcano base. They just have guys spread out through the federal bureaucracy, guys who are retired, who could be consulted. It's literally a secret society. One might even call it a cult. The idea was we wanted to bring professional investigators into the investigations. We wanted to have them to have a way for them to get new missions. And so there's always somebody off screen trolling through federal databases, trolling through the internet, trolling through news, clipping services or whatever to find the next weird thing that the players have to investigate. So they get missions from outside. It's not just the old uncle who dies and that they've never heard of before. He just shows up enough to die and leaves them a house that just happens to connect to some deep one tunnels, or it leaves them a creepy old book, or it's their super good friend Jackson Elias who only turns up to say, "Oh, there's a giant cult.
There's a cult. Avenge my dad."
Yeah, exactly. If he had yelled out like Harry Dean Stanton in Red Dawn, "Avenge me," that would have been pretty good. But regardless, those kind of plot hooks were never there in the original Call of Cthulhu. The setting was left so open that individual keepers could come up with anything they wanted. And certainly one of the things that the Tynes and Company came up with at Pagan Publishing back in the 90s was the idea of the Golden Dawn. They took the Golden Dawn as it historically existed and turned it into a place where, if you're playing Gaslight Cthulhu in London, it would be your place, your clearinghouse for people who are interested in the occult, so you can replace casualties. Information's always coming in about supernatural events, real or hoaxes or whatever. So you had a central repository even of esoteric knowledge, some of it bullshit and some of it actually related to the mythos. But even their giant library down at the Golden Dawn is probably 99% bullshit, and you've got to dig through all of that stuff about Enochian letters and whatever, and to find the one thing that goes, holy crap, Shub Niggurath is not somebody we want to meet, and make the connection to Sheila Nagig or some other fertility cult. So Delta Green does that too. Delta Green provides a way to get replace casualties. Somebody gets squished by a Shoggoth, a new character can enter the game without you having to run down to the lobby of the hotel in Cairo and find a bellhop who just happens to be a Great War veteran and archaeologist currently operating without portfolio, and quickly say, hey, who wants to go fight World Evil? And he's like, I'd like to fight World Evil. Then now you're on your 19th character playing Masks of Nyarlathotep. There's an institutional memory so that they know that there's a mythos.
Yeah.
Your players start off knowing there's a problem, not understanding what the problem is or its extent. You don't know if you start off not knowing if Bigfoot is real or if there's a devil's triangle, but you're immersed in a world where there's some supernatural problem and it's a threat to lives and people, maybe even all life. And you have a way to get new agents in, and you have some authority to ask questions. You can flash your badge and say, I need to ask questions. Like, again, why is the tribal fisherman asking me questions about Lord Halsey? I don't think I talked to the guy. And then I always thought tribal fishermen could include cod fishermen from Wales. But
yeah, same here.
Yeah. it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be some guy from Borneo who's fishing, or some Polynesian pearl diver. But anyways, you have this sort of badge that helps you ask questions. You have some authority, but you're doing it illegally. This is not part of your duties at the DEA or whatever. You're doing it on the side. And if you get caught abusing your authority, you're going to prison. You're going to be fired from the agency, and you're going to lose your authority. Maybe you'll have more time to investigate this stuff, but you'll be out on your ass. So you can't call for an airstrike or whatever. And if the players can find a way to disguise the Mythos problem as a mundane crime, then hooray, they can do that. But sometimes that, doesn't necessarily work out. What good does it do if you have the sorcerer locked up when he's just going to eventually pull a Keziah Mason and, draw some math on the wall and step through into another dimension? Delta Green was designed to bring in this modern play setting, but not turn it into a situation where the players just sit behind a desk and get on the phone to Strategic Air Command and say, we're going to have to lose Poughkeepsie. Yeah, the whole thing. So, Golf Wednesday? Absolutely. See you then. You didn't want to have it turn into that. You wanted the players to still be as nervous and as desperate and as outsiders, as much the outsiders as the players were in the original Call of Cthulhu, because that's what made it challenging. At least in the 1920s, you could appeal to everybody's horrible bigotry and racism and go, there's a strange religion down the road and they're doing strange stuff. We should get them together, a vigilance committee, and get rid of them. Nowadays, it's like, if you tried that, on the Cthulhu cultists, short of them committing murders, the ACLU, the Constitution, all kinds of things are going to get in the way of you, taking care of the Cthulhu cult, because our society has changed and taken on different attitudes about some of this stuff, which in some ways is sort of amusing, because you get to a situation where the players may find themselves in an attempt to, say in the modern age, tamp down some cult organization, find themselves aligned with some of the ugliest and most reactionary forces that our society has to offer. And that's going to be super uncomfortable, and we want it to be. We don't want to put a shine on that particular turd, but we want to point out that there are always prices to be paid when you are in this reality, that it's always expensive to your soul, to your sanity, to your peace of mind to be doing this sort of stuff. It is a horror game. It is supposed to be, and maybe Delta Green always went for a more personal apocalypse rather than a global cosmic apocalypse, but it's hard to feel the cosmic apocalypse. We don't have the perceptive ability, but boy, we can feel it when it comes home to us.
Well, one thing that people have complained about, or joked about and said about Call of Cthulhu Delta Green, is you go through so many characters, but one thing that I've always held to be true is if you treat it like an investigative game, and your characters treat it like, we're investigators, we're gonna think this out, we're not quite like the pre-run of a Shadowrun game where that's half the game right there, but at least use some common sense and not be like, well, I'm just gonna run at the Shoggoth with the shotgun, and
Well, Call of Cthulhu is one of the few games that begins right off the bat, unlike any number of games. It starts right off the bat with the concept, not all encounters are balanced. Just because you've run into it, just starting the game, does not mean that you should take it on. Ever. That you should never think that. And you especially shouldn't take it on its environment. It's one thing to shoot a bunch of deep ones on the beach with a shotgun. It's another to wade into their, get a scuba suit on and go into their underwater cave that they live in. That's a suicide mission. as far as I'm concerned. That will just get you killed. You don't want to go into their environment. You don't want to go in the ghoul tunnels, you know. If you can catch them above ground, great. But, you know, anything else is asking to get laid out, because that's their environment and they're in complete control of it. There was a nasty bit of business that John Crow inflicted using this ziggurat in the jungle that was an old fane of Sithagwa, and the Temple Guardian is a, you know, formless spawn of Sithagwa. Now, you can burn these things up, you know, and there's all kinds of ways you can damage them. Bullets and knives not being one of them, but the ziggurat turns out to be filled with these tiny holes in the walls, tunnels all throughout the ziggurat, and the liquid, creature is able to, you know, launch itself out of these holes, splash all over a character, damage them with acid, and then retreat back into the walls. Because it's the Guardian, right? It's the security system for the. It's just not going to sit in the middle of the tunnel and let them get their torches or whatever on it.
Yeah.
That ziggurat was designed for the creature's benefit, to aid it in protecting the fane, and that was brutal. It was incredibly brutal. But I'm not one for changing up the abilities of Mythos creatures to make them tougher. Just because the players have guns or whatever. I just have the creatures fight smart, and that's the trick. The players have to fight smart.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what the thing is and whether or not you should be bringing shotguns. And, you know, is that going to do any good, or is that just going to slow you down before you get into it with the problem? You got to define what the problems, you know, how it came to be, what brought it to the area, and it is it is the best system, in my opinion, for doing investigation games. Now, Trail of Cthulhu and the Gumshoe system opts for a way that the players can never miss a clue in a scene. There's these spends that you do so that you always get the clue, because in fiction, the main characters never fail to, you know, find the blood drop or the chimney mark on the windows or whatever, and that always moves the, you know, because you got to keep moving the plot forward. And if you design a game where there's it all depends on finding one clue to move the story forward, and somebody blows their die roll, or, you know, math fails and everybody blows their die roll, how do you move the game forward? And I'm like, well, you know, you design a game with more than one entry into the story is first thing you do.
Sure.
But I don't mind the idea that that clues could be missed, so long as I provide enough clues that will allow them to start feeling around the elephant and, you know, figuring out what it is when they're unwrapping it. But Call of Cthulhu is definitely a game where, you know, Philip Marlowe, Hercule Poirot, you know, the Nick and Nora Charles, the Continental Op, all these characters Sam Spade would be at home in. You know, Miss Marple, Sherlock Holmes. They would be at home in this environment because it is about telling who's lying. It is about finding the clues the police have missed. It is about unwrapping a mystery that requires specialized knowledge. The archaeologist or anthropologist who knows that this dagger is only found in the Arawak Islands of Indonesia. You know, so things like that. And helps put and they can also, because there's a supernatural element, they have to have that supernatural knowledge so that they can think about how impossible things became possible, how you can have a locked room mystery, that explains how the means, I mean, a lot of times the motive is understandable, but the means is not, as far as how the crime or the incident that brings the characters in. It's a great investigative game. And it is not a combat game. Combat is deadly, you know. Having read some Raymond Chandler, the Philip Marlowe does not want to get the shit beat out of him. A gun can kill Philip Marlowe as good as it can kill him in book 1 as at book 10, because he doesn't go up a level, right? And it's the same thing with Call of Cthulhu. Your skills get better, but you don't gain more hit points. A SEAL a guy from SEAL Team 6 can still get shot dead with a rifle just as easily as the antiquarian, as the old college professor. And I think that's important. It's also important that the opposition is just as durable. The average cultist has the same amount of hit points. So if you're fighting some, human minion, there's no reason why a madman with a knife isn't a giant fucking threat, because guess what? It's madman with a knife would be a threat in real life, and is. I may, being close enough to Portland to remember the guy who killed 2 people on the subway and almost killed, or the train, and almost killed a third with a knife. All right? Yeah. That just happened recently. That's how effective the average cultist is. Call of Cthulhu is a game where if you think of doing something that sounds like a bad idea in real life, it's a bad idea in the game. Yeah. This isn't, there's a pulp Cthulhu game out there, but I keep my two-fisted action adventure games, over on one side. That's not what, that doesn't breed horror. Your vulnerability is what breeds some of the horror, and at least the tension, at least the anxiety. Even if you're not horrified, you should be anxious about how fragile you are when faced with this stuff. I have certainly died in Call of Cthulhu many times on the first successful attack. The moment I got, I made contact with the problem, I was dead. And sometimes it's, it's just, you made a mistake. Yeah. There's no, and sometimes it's just the dice represent that cold, unfeeling Lovecraftian universe. And if it's rolled out in front of the players, that's super scary. There's no way to fudge the results. If you roll the dice and it's like, it's out in the open, is extra scary to me when you're the game master, because the story may not go the way you want it to. And that's a problem. I get that that's a problem, that you may have more story to tell and the dice say, no, you don't. Yeah. That can be problematic for people, but it's not a game of combat. And certainly, when we think of combat in Call of Cthulhu, we think of combat the way we would do it ourselves in real life, which is to, I guess the classic one was catching a cultist in the outhouse while they were having a shit. Yeah. We jumped out with shotguns and, caught them, well, not unarmed. They had the rifle leaning up against the inside of the door of the outhouse. We pulled the door open, the house, the rifle fell out. One of us snatched the rifle up, and then we beat the cultists with rifle butts until they were down. Yeah. But we still had people aiming shotguns at them while we're thrashing them with the buttstocks. And it was 4-1, Why? Because you don't want to get killed. Nobody just wants to be a hero. Yeah. Being a hero gets you in trouble. Call of Cthulhu is definitely a game where if you're having a running gun battle, shit has gone wrong. Yeah. It's like in real life sort of spy games or spying, if it's come to a gun battle, you effed up, buddy. They should never have known you were there. They should never have perceived you were there. But at the same time, it does have it's going to have its exciting moments. There is the complaint that everyone starts off as an archaeologist and ends as commando. Yeah. And that has happened. I'm not saying that hasn't happened. But at the same time, combat is to be absolutely feared. And sure. I think that's, I think that's worthwhile in gaming. It's not fun. You don't get, there's not a lot of wiggle room in the combat system. The baddest ass person can go down in a minute. All it takes is, one well-placed shot. Combat is something to be feared. Yes, definitely. In the same way that directly encountering the monsters should be feared, because they are, the intent is that they are beyond our ability to grapple with effectively. Having to come up with hypergeometric magic with a K means of solving problems is one of the most uncomfortable parts of the game, because it using that stuff damages your character.
Yeah.
Even more certain combat might damage your character, using magic will absolutely damage your character. And that's sort of that is in fact a more heroic trade-off. What damage are you going to take to save a bunch of people that maybe you're never going to meet, that are abstractions? But the damage on you is not an abstraction. That is an absolute, fact for the rest of your character's life. But yeah, I find Call of Cthulhu to be a marvelous game, and the mechanics marvelous as creating a precarious situation always.
This episode is brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Yes, nothing quite brings out cosmic horror like soft, cuddly things on your feet. And they got Cthulhu slippers, but they also have Dino sound slippers. Every couple of steps, they make a roaring sound, and they're super soft, and they've got non-skid pads on the feet so you don't slip and fall when you're doing stuff. All right? And also, why not check out threadless.pgttcm.com and check out our cool shirts. I mean, you got a graphic designer on staff making t-shirts all the time. Might as well check them out. They're pretty cool. And you can support the Cthulhu Mythos without looking like a weirdo, I mean, or look like a super weirdo, depending on what you define weirdo as. I guess my definition of weirdo is probably a little different than yours. All right, back to the show. Hey, guess who's up next? It's Ken Hite, and he's talking about the fall of Delta Green and his golden Ennie. All right, let's go. Now we have Ken Hite again, fresh back from Gen Con, Ennie winner. So, yeah, you just won an Ennie for the fall of Delta Green at Gen Con.
I did, as well as an Ennie for Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, my podcast.
Oh, congratulations.
Robin
Yeah, really cool. Really cool. Yeah, so just a quick update for people who may not know what this is. Ennies.
What any of this nonsense?
Yeah, any of this nonsense is. The Ennies is the N-World. Oh goodness.
The N-World Award.
Yeah.
And it's given out in across the role-playing game category, although it includes things like RPG-related product and podcast. And for example, the RPG-related product that won and also won Product of the Year was the Masks of Nyarlathotep audio drama done by our mutual good friends at the H.P. Lovecraft Historical.
Yeah, that was such a really, really, really good one.
Your good friend. I assume that Sean is also your good friend.
Well,
you don't have beef with each other.
No. We don't have beef with each other, but we're not on a first name basis. We're like, oh, hey, you're that guy.
Sorry,
oh, hey, you're that guy.
Mr. Branny and you are not having beef.
No.
I think I may have caused beef. I'm sorry. That was not my intention. My intention was only to drop Sean's name. But now look what I've done.
Oh, no. Now there'll be tension. You'll be like, who's that guy again?
Right. Not tension in Portland, of all places. I think a city that is made entirely of coffee and fog would not be tense.
Oh, no. Gen Con, for people who don't know, Gen Con is a huge gaming convention that now takes place in Indianapolis, Indiana?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because forever it took place in Milwaukee, and it's like, okay, Gotta get to Milwaukee for Gen Con.
And before that, it took place in Lake Geneva, hence the name Gen Con.
Yeah.
Right. But now it is in Indianapolis. It's been there since early this century. Indianapolis is a big city that accepts hordes of travelers to see the Indianapolis 500 every year.
Mm-hmm.
They've hosted the Super Bowl because they have a theoretically Major League Football team.
Okay.
And so they are more used to bigger crowds than Milwaukee was.
Yeah.
And also they're much nicer to us than Milwaukee ever was. Milwaukee was always very mean. They were all, get these nerds out of our lovely city so we can go back to vomiting in it. And then Indianapolis is like, welcome, nerds. It turns out you have money. And we love money. We think money is the bomb. Also, you guys.
That's pretty cool.
It's been a beautiful marriage, as are many marriages in which one partner brings money. And so the the city of Indianapolis has opened its beefy arms to us, and Gen Con has grown from, I think, about 30,000, maybe even less, when it moved to over 70,000 this year. So it's a big, beautiful party for me and 500 of my closest personal friends and 70,000 lucky congoers. And it's the biggest solely game convention, I think, in the world, although I think more people show up at Essen Spiel, which is also kind of a trade fair.
Okay.
And obviously more people show up at Comic-Con, which is a multivariant nerdery show, but it's mostly a movie and TV show.
Yeah, no, I was curious if Gen Con hadn't turned more into an industry show, or if that was something else.
No, the owner, Peter Adkison, is very, very clear that this is a gaming convention first and foremost. Sometimes there are computer game companies that come and make a lot of noise in their corner of the floor, but they're not super encouraged. And there was a brief period where we were worried that it was just going to become like a kind of a Midwestern E3, but that word went away. And for however they're doing it, whatever jiggery pokery of magic they're doing, the floor is always open to game manufacturers primarily, and to a lesser extent, people who sell, ephemera and doodads and things like that. But it's a game show first and foremost, and of course, it also hosts, world championships of Magic the Gathering and things like that, so that whatever kind of a game you're into, there's probably a big event of it at Gen Con as well.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. And you got a gold Emmy for The Fall of Delta Green.
I did. For best setting, it was the category in which it won.
Nice.
And so, like I said in my acceptance speech, I did not write the setting for Fall of Delta Green. It's Delta Green that takes place in the 1960s. So obviously, I owe a great debt to other great masters of dystopian horror game design, such as John Scott Tynes, Adam Scott Glancy, Dennis Detwiller, and Robert S. McNamara.
Nice.
So I did not make up. That joke, by the way, did not kill at the Ennies either. So don't worry,
okay.
Podcast audience at home. Google it and laugh later. But yes, Tynes, Glancy, and Detwiller created the original Delta Green setting back in the 90s. It has been a mainstay of Call of Cthulhu role-playing up until it emerged like a beautiful butterfly into its own role-playing game system last year and won a great mort of Ennies then as well. So this is, I think, the 8th Ennie Award for Delta Green in the last 2 years.
Wow.
So people love it.
Good deal. Yeah, and can you talk about what makes your Delta Green different from like original flavored Delta Green?
There's two things that are primarily the spin that Fall of Delta Green puts on Delta Green first. It does not use either the BRP Chaosium system or the new BRP-derived Delta Green role-playing game system by Greg Stolze. It uses the Gumshoe engine, designed by Robin D. Laws and present in such games by me as Trail of Cthulhu, Knights, Black Agents, and Bubble Gumshoe. It therefore interoperates nicely with Trail of Cthulhu and Knights, Black Agents. So if there's a cool spy move that you really liked in Knights, Black Agents, you can swoop it into Fall of Delta Green with very little bruising to the game system. Likewise, if there are more Mythos monsters in Trail of Cthulhu that you think should also be in Delta Green or in Fall of Delta Green, you can port them over pretty seamlessly. You might want to add a few more health points and another point of armor just because the characters might have access to M16s.
Sure.
But other than that, it's a pretty seamless port. And obviously there are conversion rules in the back for converting it from the Delta Green role-playing game to Fall of Delta Green. So all your bases should be covered there. The other big difference is that it's set in the 1960s, which is to say the decade in which Delta Green overreaches and is destroyed as a legitimate government program. As longtime Delta Green fans know, in an operation called Operation Obsidian in Cambodia in 1970, Delta Green took part in a disastrous operation that basically blew the gaff on the American invasion, and the Pentagon blamed Delta Green for the failure. Delta Green was decommissioned, the program was ended, and all of the Delta Green operatives had to continue fighting the Mythos, but in an unofficial, unsanctioned way instead of the official sanctioned way that Fall of Delta Green depicts.
That's crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because all of the sort of, Apocalypse Now and all of the counterculture and all of the 60s Cold War John le Carré material is super, super relevant to, it's happening this era. So this era has got all these touchstones in popular culture and in media and in history that make slotting in the unnatural, as it refers to the Cthulhu Mythos, kind of a 3-inch putt, if I may. Use the Gothic vernacular.
No, and one thing that's really great about the gumshoe system that's used for Trail of Cthulhu and Fall of Delta Green is it's very cinematic. It's a drama system. I mean, as you've said before, and it's so easy to like watch movies from the 60s, like especially like kind of like more like Easy Rider, Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, and kind of adopt that nihilism into your game. Kind of like, oh yeah, this is a good example of like cinematic nihilism. Now let's put space monsters and cultists in there.
Yeah, Deer Hunter is very much someone responding to the PTSD of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Well, this game loads onto that the PTSD of Yog Sothoth. Not only have you seen the worst humanity can do, also physics does that. Yeah. It's not just humanity; it's literally the universe that is that malevolent. So good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck shaking that off.
Yeah.
You play Ukrainian roulette with more bullets in the gun.
The Delta Green setting itself is very unique, and it kind of takes a lot of elements from the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game itself, and then it gives you more tools, but just like those tools to like build yourself a guillotine.
Exactly. Yeah, people are always, I mean, the sort of the nihilist gun nut, I guess, is the ideal Delta Green, certainly player, often character.
Sure.
But the notion that, we have machine guns, therefore we can defeat the Cthulhu Mythos is ludicrous on the face of it, but it seems to be exactly the right bait to get players to walk into far worse traps than they ever would in an old-fashioned shotguns and jazz records style Call of Cthulhu game. And then also Delta Green performed the massive gift of providing you a reason to have all these players put together. They're put together by the program or by the conspiracy in 90s Delta Green.
Yeah.
And so, how do you find out about the horrors? Someone at the NSA sends you an intercept, and so you found out about horrors. Go deal with it. And it solves a lot of the sort of, before you get to the fun part of other games, by providing you with that narrative structure. And then Fall of Delta Green obviously follows on with that, because not only are you getting a message from your putative cell, it's your job to do it. You're collecting a sweet GS10 paycheck to go do that.
Do you have any like examples of campaigns that you've ran in the past in like Fall of Delta Green?
Oh, I'm running Fall of Delta Green is fairly recent, so I'm running it right now.
Okay.
With a group of nascent gumshoe designers,
nice.
For the most part, and basically this is an attempt to get them so familiar with the gumshoe rules that they can design games in gumshoe, and that everyone wins. Them and the system and me. So that's sort of its secret goal, but its other goal is just for me to get some of my Cthulhuid jams kicked out, because my main game, one of my players has a Lovecraft allergy, which is understandable but unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I have basically been unable to run Lovecraft games in my main game forever. So now I have the opportunity to run for people who have, encouraged me to come at them, bro. And so I'm doing a degree of fun with that. So we've had adventures such as the exorcism of the Pentagon by the Yippies. I mean, they tried to make link arms around the Pentagon and chant "Demon come out." The Fugs were playing, and Kenneth Anger was underneath a truck drawing magical sigils and all of that. That's a real historical event that happened, because the 60s were whack.
Yes.
So I ran an event set at that event, an adventure set at that event, an operation. And the player characters showed up and were part of a Delta Green team designed to disrupt whatever these hippies were up to. And sure enough, they were up to something, or some tiny group of hippies was up to something. So one of them stabbed Kenneth Anger. That was great fun for everybody. That gets a great joy by all of my film student friends.
Nice.
Whenever I say that. They did a lengthy program of infiltration of a small college in Maine. It turned out to be the center of two competing unnatural forces, and they had to figure out what was going on. Basically, this was me taking the novel Tam Lin and the novel by Pamela Dean and the novel The Secret History by Donna Tartt and having them fight in a Cthulhu Mythos universe. So they wound up getting really tangled up with the Classics Club, which turns out to be much less savory in a Delta Green world.
Sounds neat.
And they've investigated a mysterious haunting of a shuttered amusement park. There's a historical amusement park called Norumbega Park in Warren, Massachusetts. And when you have a shuttered amusement park in Lovecraft country named after a mythical land inhabited by glowing giants, it doesn't take a transcendent genius such as myself to think that's a hell of a Fall of Delta Green moment. And then the last adventure we've just run was another really brief one-shot. Basically, the notion is that a member of the Exalted Circle, which is the very high-end group of influential Cthulhu worshippers, Dagon cultists in the United States government and military-industrial complex, a high-level member of that group is being brought down for heroin trafficking charges. And so in the brief moment before the warrants are served, they're sent down to his beach house to serve a warrant on the beach house and grab up anything Mythos that they can find. And that I was inspired by that, by the Jeffrey Epstein case, which is blowing up again.
Yeah.
And thinking, and when we saw his creepy Poseidon temple, I was like, oh my God, Delta Green is so excited at the opportunity to break into that Poseidon temple legally now. And I thought, oh, I can do that in the past. I just, change Jeffrey Epstein to somebody else, change it from, multiple statutory rape counts and straight up rape counts to something a little less ooky, because after all, it's just a game of mythos horror.
Yeah.
And then, turn them loose and say, this is a race until the real law enforcement can get here. How much mythos stuff can you grab from this house that has in no way been cleaned or vetted by anyone? So all the booby traps and all the monsters might still be lurking around. So that was a fun way to do a haunted house that still had sort of a foot on the gas pedal to it. That was a good game.
Nice.
So really, it's anything you can think of. The sample scenario in the book is set in Vietnam at a fire base way up near the DMZ. There's another sample scenario that Gareth Hanrahan did for Free RPG Day. That's another Vietnam scenario. And right now, we are in the process at Pelgrane Press and I want to say it's in development now because I think it's all written, but it may be being tightened up. It basically, playtest reports are coming in now. So Gareth Ryder Hanrahan, who is the lead writer on it, is assembling all those playtest reports and putting that feedback into the game. But I wrote the sort of story, and I wrote one of the operations. But the story is that there is some sort of unnatural activity all along the heroin trail. And in 1968, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics is basically purged because it's so horribly corrupt. It's replaced by the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And the player characters are inserted by Delta Green into that moment so that they can have NBDD cover while they investigate stuff along the heroin trail. And some of it is historical stuff and some of it is our own wild imaginary stuff, but it's all in the very real backdrop of the French Connection and how the French Connection is sort of getting ready for its own inevitable fall, which is going to be in, I think, 3 years after the events of this campaign. But all the historical backdrop is there for a great globe-trotting campaign, Mass of Nyarlathotep or Shadows of Yog-Sothoth style, just linked by heroin. So all manner of fun.
Cool. Very cool. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, the scenario that I wrote is Operation Alonzo, which is the one that takes place in Saigon.
Aha.
And the agents are sent in to surveil a heroin summit that legitimately happened in Saigon in 1968, just after Tet. And then that's their cover mission, and their real mission is to find out what happened to the Cthulhu cult after it was all destroyed in 1955. And there's no way it could have come back, except that that's what they just said about the Viet Cong, and we just had Tet.
Yeah.
So maybe we should look into what happened to the Cthulhu cult. And of course, like I need to tell you, bad doings afoot. But it became a kind of a big scenario because it turns out if agents are legitimate representatives of the federal government on a real job that they can, people can call back and check, they can do a lot in Vietnam in 1968.
Huh.
So I had to write up, what happens if they go to the Navy and demand a patrol boat take them somewhere? What happens if they go to the South Vietnamese Army? What happens if they go to the CIA? What happens if they go to the Army Signals listening post at on the edge of the city, the name of which has dropped completely out of my mind because I wrote it long ago. But believe me, it's real, and it basically was a central switchboard for all radio traffic in and out of Vietnam, and most of the phone traffic as well. And it turns out that, the surveillance state was real. It was just in 1968 and they didn't have computers yet. So, or they had a few computers, but not many. So it's there's a lot of options and a lot of things you can do. Plus Saigon at that time is a city of probably 2 million people. No one knows because there's huge numbers of refugees have swarmed in. So it's a gigantic city in its own right. So I had to write up Saigon. So it turned out to be a bigger nut to crack than I thought when I foolishly assigned it to myself. But I think the end result gives you a template as a Fall of Delta Green handler that you can use to run any kind of adventure set in Saigon or any kind of adventure set even in Vietnam in general, because you have sort of this is the sort of rolls you have to make to get an army patrol. This is the sort of rolls you have to make to get an airstrike. All of those sorts of data and details are in the scenario.
Interesting. How do you research this?
Well, that was harder than I thought it would be. It turns out we had 1 million baby boomers off and on in Saigon in 1968. Not one of them has written a history of Saigon in 1968. I thought I would be stumbling over source material, but there wasn't any. The histories of Saigon that do exist are fairly patchy. Michael Hare, of course, covers what Saigon was like in his book Dispatches, which is a great book that I encourage everyone to read if they're setting games in Vietnam, or in the Vietnam War. I shouldn't use the clumsy shorthand of naming the war after just the country. That's mean. But if they're setting games in the war, then reading Dispatches is a great choice. But again, he's being very impressionistic and he's talking about the whole country. So there just wasn't one. I had to dig through a ton of websites, most of them put up by veterans, that was like, here was what we did in Saigon, and then sort of try and blow it out. And individual projects, like the building of the new port north of the city, had big web pages about them. So I could have gone into huge detail. And that listening post that I mentioned earlier, that had a whole web page about it. And so I was able to dig pretty deep there. But in terms of what's going on in the street, how much does food cost? Where are the good parts of town? Where are the bad parts of town? That had to be assembled from lots more sources than I thought I would have to do. So it turned out to be kind of a long jog. And for example, no one ever says on the internet that I'm able to find, oh, by the way, Vietnam has 10 districts, 1 to 10. They changed all those boundaries after the communists took over. So I was just blissfully going through reading, oh, this is in District 4. Well, District 4 moved. So I had to refigure everything out. That was a fun thing to discover halfway through the project. But I found a map that the University of Michigan maintains in its archives that was from Saigon in that era. It was actually I'm going to say a tourist map, but that's basically what it was. It was a tourist map of Saigon. It was for civilians who were coming out to be part of the war effort. And it had all the boundaries and it had big labels on all the streets. So that sort of gave me a grounding. And then I'm able to just there's a great website called the Saigoneer, which is about the history of Saigon. And it's run by some expats, I guess, who live in Saigon, what's now called Ho Chi Minh City. And they and they are really into Saigon in the 1920s under French control when it was super exotic and luxurious and weird. It was the Pearl of the Orient. And so if you're running a straight up Call of Cthulhu game, I urge you to go to Saigoneer.com and check out their site. And then they've got some stuff from the war era as well. And so that gave me some backdrop. And then, of course, you find a thing and it says, oh, this was where an emperor of Vietnam murdered 1,700 rebels and buried their bodies to make sure that they, in a deliberately desecrating way.
Huh.
And it's like, well, where's that? Oh, it's right there at that frickin' traffic intersection in Saigon. Well, I found a big pile of ghosts if I need them. So things like that show up. And, you know, there are legitimate sort of urban legends that Saigon has because it's a great city like all great cities. So, you know, where's the most haunted houses in Saigon? Those pop up and I dump those in. But it's about taking, I don't even know how many different almost individual lines or words from this whole panoply of books.
Mm-hmm.
I had to find what it cost to stay at the Hotel Continental by literally Googling, you know, Hotel Continental Saigon dollars in Google Books. And I found a novel that was set there and it gave the price. And that price checked other things I'd found. But it's not like there's a website somewhere that has the Hotel Continental and what it charged in 1968. You have to really dig in, and that's what I had to do.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, because, I mean, I write adventures for myself and my friends from here and there, and stuff set in Vietnam or Ho Chi Minh City in, like, the 70s for, like, a, I don't know, modern horror campaign of some sort. And just like knowing that it's like so hard to find this stuff in like 2004, being like, how's Ken doing this?
Well, now, whenever we publish that we call them Looking Glass. Whenever we publish that Saigon Looking Glass at Pelgrane in PDF, and maybe as part of the Borellus Connection, which is the name of that big adventure, that big campaign. I don't know if it's going to be sold by itself or as part of the book. I think a lot depends on how long the rest of the book is. Mm-hmm. But people will at least be able to buy that and save themselves the research.
Delta Green, what's anything in the future for Fall of Delta Green?
Like I said, we've got the Borellus Connection burgeoning there. That, in theory, is the end of our license. We're licensed. Pelgrane was licensed for the core book and one supplement.
Okay.
I, of course, have been writing little sort of bits and bobs of Fall of Delta Green related information for the Pelgrane newsletter, or it's the Pelgrane blog, I guess you'd call it, C-Page XX.
Sure. So
if you go to Pelgrane Press and you click on C-Page XX, or you just search on my name, or you search on Fall of Delta Green, you'll see some of the stuff that I've written. So, for example, one of the standard things that people saw, I don't want to say standard, but a usual kind of cryptid that people encountered in Vietnam was rock apes. And these were sort of weirdly aggressive apes that would throw rocks at you.
Huh.
And so there's another sighting of a winged woman over Da Nang. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And there's, of course, the famous undersea object that came up out of Cam Ranh Bay back in the 1880s. Mm-hmm. So I put together a little list of cryptids in Vietnam, and that's on the site. Or playing as Project Blue Book investigators looking into UFOs.
Nice.
There's a little thing on how to do that. So there's some material on the web on C-Page XX. Right now, the gold medal, I think, has got Arc Dream Publishing, who are the owners of the Delta Green property, or it's complex. Pagan still owns it, but Arc Dream and Pagan overlap very strongly.
Yeah.
But winning that gold medal, I believe, has perhaps got them to be interested in maybe allowing some more supplements. And we sort of spitballed some stuff, but until they, sign on the bottom line, I can't promise things that may not get delivered.
Oh, sure.
But watch that space, I would say.
So going on with the idea of music and culture and stuff, like what would you recommend as like source material for like a real kind of dark, gritty Fall of Delta Green campaign that you really feel like would set the mood for what you're trying to have as a product?
Well, I mean, a lot of it depends on where you want to set it.
Sure.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for example, makes a great sort of a template if you're doing a Delta Green campaign where they're stumbling over the edges of the Manson family.
All right.
Right? Because Charles Manson is sort of the big coda to the 1960s counterculture.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, other books and other movies that go deeper into the Manson killings, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is both great and recent, so people can rush right out and see it. And then Tarantino just has obsessively created the world of 1969 on screen, so it feels very much like that period. It's almost ridiculously how 1969 that movie is, but there you are. It's really great. And of course, Apocalypse Now is the ultimate touchstone for in-country Vietnam-y sort of horror, Vietnam War horror. But there's tons of other Vietnam War movies. There's Full Metal Jacket. There's Platoon. There's other great Vietnam War movies. And since war movies are horror movies at their heart, most of them, it doesn't take that much work to sort of say, but what's behind the heart? What's even darker than the heart of darkness?
Yeah.
Oh, right. The mythos is. And then there's plenty of other sort of material. When I was writing the game, I put together an iTunes playlist that was only music from the decade 1960 to 1970.
Okay.
So there was tons of Bob Dylan, which will put you in the mood right there. Lots of Beach Boys, lots of Rolling Stones, all the sort of weird jazz and stuff that was coming out in the 60s. There's an album of Cambodian rock that I found, and another album of Japanese pub rock from the 60s that I found, and dumped those into the mix.
Oh, cool.
The Velvet Underground, God bless them, did their first 4 albums between 67 and 70. So every now and again, I would get a blessedly tambourine-free track would come up on my on my shuffle. And really, when you listen to the Velvet Underground in that context, you absolutely know why they bombed at the Fillmore West.
Yeah.
Because it's a whole different musical universe from the rest of the 1960s that you're listening to. But that was, but that was me. But for example, when I ran that adventure that I told you about the levitation of the Pentagon, that chant is on YouTube. That the Yippies did, and the song that the Fugs played during the rally, all the Fugs songs live are on YouTube. So I played the Fugs CIA on sort of not repeat but a lot during the game, and then played those chants and sort of hippie noises. And all that stuff is burned off YouTube. So if you are looking for anything, whether it be the one-hit wonder Eve of Destruction, which is a great sort of a setting piece that is not quite so overused as Paint It Black, but on the other hand, there's a reason we overuse Paint It Black. It's terrific. So you can watch Gimme Shelter, the Stones movie that ends at Altamont and ends with the sort of deaths at Altamont. That's another great thing. If you are looking for the early 60s, obviously, there's tons of space race movies. Apollo 11 is back there. The movie about the African American women that basically did all the calculations for John Glenn, with the name of which is escaping me because it was not a very good movie. But aesthetically, it was a great movie. And it's sort of, you're looking at that mid-century period. All the first bunch of Bond movies, all the Connery Bond movies are from that era. You can watch those. And that will give you sort of a sense of what it's like to be a lived. You don't watch them necessarily as spy movies, although they're perfectly fine as those.
Sure.
You watch them as, oh look, what's that guy wearing? What does that casino look like? What do the streets look like?
All right.
Any movie made in that era. There's a very, very late Fritz Lang movie called The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse.
I love that film.
It's about surveillance paranoia. It's set in Berlin in 1960. You can watch it. That's when it was filmed.
Nice.
In Berlin in 1960. There's the original movie of The Quiet American, not the remake, but the original one made in 1958, was filmed on location in Saigon. You can watch that and see what Saigon actually looked like before it got blown to flinders and blown into a mass of refugees by the expanded war. And that will, I think, put you in a place and time more even than doing any amount of research. If you just watch that film, you're seeing Saigon happen around you in a way that you can't do unless you have a gigantic budget and also the sort of maniacal obsession with detail that someone like Tarantino has.
Yeah. Huh.
So even sort of mediocre stuff that was made in the 60s is going to give you a better doorway into the 60s than all but the best stuff that's made now about the 60s.
All right. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Wow. Yeah. No. I'm excited to play some Fall of Delta Green sometime in the future here, and I've got the book. I've been going through it. It's I don't have the book. I have the PDF, and that is a crazy PDF. It's amazing looking. It's the graphic design on that book is awesome. Just
that's Jen McCleary was the graphic designer and layout person and art director on that book.
Yeah, no, it's really, really impressive.
And what happened was Kat Tobin, who's the managing director and co-owner of Pelgrane Press, so she was sort of up against it deadline-wise.
Yeah.
The previous I was late with the manuscript because see previous discussion of research. The previous layout person sort of bobbled the ball a little bit, was not going in a direction she liked, thought it was kind of boring and conventional.
Yeah.
And she set up a Hail Mary to someone we'd worked with before, Jen McCleary, who does this great sort of collage-inspired art as her, I don't want to say it's a day job because she's an artist, so it's her career, her avocation, and she does it very well. And so Kat said, if I just send you a pile of money and this manuscript, can you send me back a book I can take to print? And you do all the art direction, you get all the art. Here are the previous art elements that we have. Use them, don't use them. We don't care. And Jen amazingly stepped up. I mean, I thought I would be lucky to get a book back that was sort of like aping Steranko doing Nick Fury, right? Or that was aping sort of, it was going to have Paisley and it was going to have some op art and it was going to be, the big puffy 60s fonts. And it was like, all right, fine, whatever. You kids and your yellow submarines, knock yourselves out. And I actually did request the font. I said I would love this to be in Futura if we possibly could.
Yeah.
Because that was the font of all the encyclopedias and things that I read growing up as a kid in the late 60s and early 70s. And for me, that font just says that decade to me. And it was used, universally in that era. For example, one of the things I did was when I wrote the prehistory of Earth, the Cthulhu Mythos prehistory of Earth, I went to 1960s geology textbooks.
Oh, cool.
So that I'm not accidentally, saying, oh, this is the Hangenberg event. Well, we didn't discover the Hangenberg event until the 90s, so why would you put that in? So when I do the date for the end of the Cretaceous, it's the date that is given in those textbooks, not the date that we know.
Okay, all right.
Big air quotes, but that we currently best guess the Cretaceous in. So, and Future was all over those books. So I said, do it in Future. That was my only request. So I get back, not only is it in Futura, but it looks amazing. It's of the 60s without aping the 60s. It's psychedelic without being stupid. The color palette shifts and weaves all over the place depending on theme and depending on quality. There's some amazing pieces of sort of found art. There's a collage effect, lots of public domain art from the federal government or from Wikipedia or from wherever that gets slotted in. And I'm looking at the book and it just blew me away how good it was. And what I did was then I sent Jen a bunch more links to a bunch more things that I thought she could use as art. And it's like, rather than that map of the Arab-Israeli war, here's the West Point map of the Arab-Israeli war. Why don't you use that? Here's a picture of, G. Gordon Gray, who's in the book. He's a real historical figure. You maybe use that. And here's a picture of the munitions building where Delta Green is headquartered in the 1960s. And then she just sort of slots it in wherever she finds space or doesn't slot it in because there isn't space. She's the artist, not me.
Nice.
And so I literally had nothing to do with it except at the very, very end saying, oh my God, this is amazing. Here's some more stuff. I did work very, very closely with the cartographer Ralph Shemin on the end paper maps at the beginnings and the ends of the book.
Yeah.
The world in 1960, January 1st, 1960, which is a world very much, under the thumb of the colonial powers and therefore under the thumb of America and NATO. And there's comforting, reassuring American green all over the map. And then you switched to the 1970 and everything's gone to flinders, and all the countries are independent and none of them like their former colonial masters, and France has left NATO, and so there's very few patches of American green all over the map, and the number of red countries has expanded mightily since then, and China is now a dull glowing orange. It's not even a Soviet red, it's its own color. So the notion of sort of presenting a geopolitical those two maps, I think, did more to sort of set the stage, I think, than many thousand words would have. All those words, which you could have gotten off Wikipedia anyway.
Yeah.
And then onto those maps, we put like little tiny elder signs and UFO tracks and other stuff to make it a Delta Green map, not just a boring map.
Nice. Very nice. So if there was a property that you could do work with for like the gumshoe system, what would it be?
Well, I have got most of my licensed property Jim Jams out.
Yeah.
With 2 Star Trek games back to back, for example. And licensing Delta Green, I guess, is a licensed property, but since I was president of the creation, it doesn't feel the same as when I was doing Star Trek.
All right.
Also, Pagan is nicer and smarter than Paramount, so that was nice.
Yeah.
We had the opportunity a couple of times back in the late 90s to do an X-Files game, and I think that if I didn't have to worry about approvals, I think I could do a pretty great X-Files game. And of course, it's a natural gumshoe structure. And I've always thought that the Quatermass movies and TV shows done by Nigel Neal way back in the day would be great to adapt. The sort of, constantly overreaching, discovering that science is worse than you thought it was. And then maybe drill a little into the cosmic implications of the 3 Quatermass films or 4 Quatermass films. Maybe not, but presenting Quatermass as a structure around which to put some elements of 70s folk horror and some elements of the good bits of early Doctor Who when they were running around with UNIT and having all those fun adventures.
Yeah.
That sort of little box of British science horror, I think, is a fun little field to dig around in. And it'd be fun to do that with the excuse of having the Quatermass license. But I assume BBC they would make Paramount look like Pagan Publishing, I guess. I mean, there's a Doctor Who game out there from Cubicle 7, and from all accounts, it's very, very good. And they're very nice to work with those guys. But with a property like Quatermass, which I guess is getting a relaunch, I heard it was. Cross fingers it won't be terrible like Sherlock, but who can say? But it'd be fun to work with that property. That was great fun. Nice. And I had a brief window where I might have done a Mission Impossible game, which if it included the TV show, would be great. If it was just the Tom Cruise movie Mission Impossible, that would be less fun. But either way, I could just basically reskin Nice Black Agents and get paid twice for working, which is nice.
Yeah, no.
But Pelgrane are not like super right out there seeking licenses at the moment because we've got so many great ideas from in-house.
Well, that's cool.
Obviously if someone came along and, if the Duffer Brothers came and begged Pelgrane to take the Stranger Things license for $1, I'll bet they would. But, they're not out there chasing the license game with some of the other game companies.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. And any upcoming projects that you can talk about right now, Ken?
Right now, I am finishing, and probably by the time this drops, I will have finished the last volume or the most recent volume of Tour de Lovecraft, The Destinations, and coming up, Hellenistica, my 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting, set in the good parts version of the 3rd century BC.
Nice.
So, war elephants and griffins and gods and monsters and magicians and big bags of gold and common language from Gibraltar to the Ganges. Basically, It's as close as the world has ever historically gotten to a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and no one has ever done it. And so I thought, well, I'll do it.
Yeah, I actually have been checking out 5th edition and getting up on the rules and stuff, so I can check it out when it comes out.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Good to know that you're proactive there.
Oh, yeah. No, I haven't played D&D since I tried 4th edition and was like, hey, how's that Pathfinder doing?
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed playing 4th. I never tried to run it, but I enjoyed playing it. But I tried running 3rd, which became Pathfinder, and found it was just too rich for my blood. When I was 12, I could have run it easily, I'm sure.
Sure.
But My brain is too full of other things to memorize third edition. But there's tons of, of first edition, hacks out there. The old school Renaissance, the Black Hack, other great games. And then fifth edition is super smooth and clean and pretty. So I'm looking forward to banging it into the Hellenistic era and seeing what falls out.
Very cool. Very cool. And I guess I want to say that's all I have for you today, Ken.
Fantastic. If you want to say it, then who am I to say you're wrong?
Yeah, no, but sometime in the future, I'd love to talk to you about some space monsters in August Derleth.
Love to do it.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you later, Ken, and have yourself a super great day.
Hey, you too, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks again so much for Ken Hite coming on the show and talking. Thanks again, Ken. We really appreciate always having you on the show. Thanks again. And here's some more Adam Scott Glancy talking about the Cthulhu Mythos, talking about Delta Green, talking about stuff. So it's, a lot to pick and choose from. If you're a Delta Green, Scott Glancy guy, if you love the Cthulhu Mythos, this is going to be something you want to listen to. And yeah, it's not so much about the specific setting itself, but things to think about and things to do, things to try, and just kind of like preferences. Kinda cool. So I highly recommend it. Check it out. And if not, have yourselves a good day. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, we are on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're got the RSS feed at pgttcm.podbean.com, and check out our website at pgttcm.com. And we are Black Clock Audio Tales too. So check out all that stuff. And here's some Scott. What are some of your favorite ideas that you've come up with or come across in Delta Green?
Let's see. One of the things I was really happy with that Dennis Detweiler wrote was Dennis did a pretty good job of knitting other conspiracy theories into Delta Green. I mean, we started off working Roswell in as a real incident, but also a fake incident where the Migo are looking for new humans to do their bidding. And so they make a fake flying saucer and they make aliens that won't gross us out and make us lose our marbles. These little sort of biomechanical puppets, the Greys, and they get the U.S. government to do their bidding in a kind of, cargo cult. Here's some high-tech baubles and trinkets. We'd like some American citizens now for some probing. And the U.S. government ends up replacing the old cult that the Migo had in Whisper in Darkness. That was a great idea. That was John Tynes that came up with that. Dennis came up with a really great idea involving the Philadelphia experiment, which is a classic conspiracy theory about a World War II warship that they tried to make it invisible, but they accidentally sent it into another dimension temporarily. And so he decided that the device used on the USS Eldridge was actually the Tillinghast resonator from the story From Beyond. And I thought that was a brilliant use of Lovecraft's stories to bring it into modern conspiracy. We never got a chance to use the people of Kenyan from the story The Mound to replace the idea of the Nordics, the angelic, very human-looking, way too white and blonde and Aryan aliens who are they represent a vein of UFOology from the 50s that has a distinctive religious aspect to it. The aliens are always here to bring a message of peace, and they always tell the person they meet that you're very special and important, and you have a message to deliver to mankind. So go get on talk radio or the local TV station. And there's a fair amount of that, but I would have liked to have used the Nordics for to represent the people of Kenyan, the degenerates, sort of superhumans who live under the earth, which would be nice because it gets into the whole Darrows and Tarows, hollow earth shaver stuff from the 1930s. But Sam Johnson beat me to that with the resection of time way back, I think, in the 90s. where he wrote a very good thing for Chaosium called A Resection of Time, where he has the Kenyan doing that. I mean, I'm sure we could resurrect it, but I've also wanted to bring in the serpent people to be mistaken for the reptoids.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that just drives me up the wall with this whole reptoid thing that's become so popular with, oh God, what's the David Icke? You know, one of the things that drives me nuts about Icke's reptoids nonsense is that he's cribbing it all from Robert E. Howard. I mean, the reptoids, his serpent people, absolutely in the Cull stories and Cull of Atlantis stories, and you know, by this axe I rule and all that kind of good stuff. He's freeing Velusia from rule by shape-changing serpent people, right?
Yeah.
Who have taken over disguised as people, you know, disguised as humans, and are ruling, having, you know, they murder whoever becomes king, and one of their guys takes his place. And I mean, it's all right there in Robert E. Howard, and everyone's acting like this is some brilliant new thing. And oh my God, you're just ripping off a pulp writer from the 30s. But I would love to do something with the serpent people as a kind of fifth column, looking to get the monkeys off the planet and restore their Ophidian empire to its former glory. I would love to do something with that. The one thing that is going in the direction at the moment is I'm going to be doing a new organization for Delta Green, which will involve Nodens. In some of the early Call of Cthulhu stuff from the 80s, particularly from Theater of the Mind, Tome, there were some things where, you know, Nodens is treated like some sort of get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah.
Say Nodens 3 times and he shows up and gets your ass out of the scenario. Or
He's
whatever.
the good one.
Yeah. And I wanted to come up with something. I was very inspired by some stuff I got in the comic book Fall of Cthulhu, where they portray Nodens as sort of like Nodens just hates Nyarlathotep. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing I know for sure about Nodens is that he will monkey wrench Nyarlathotep stuff. I don't know if he's going to help with Yagalanak. I don't think so. But if there's a way for him to kick Nyarlathotep in the balls, he will. Although his options are limited because he appears to be sort of stuck either in the Dreamlands or in places that are close to the Dreamlands, that are Dreamlands adjacent, like the Strange High House in the Mist.
Yeah.
But I went back and dug around and, you know, found some stuff about where Lovecraft got the term Nodens, and he's got aspects of hunting and war and healing and all kinds of other stuff and a relationship to dogs, which are also related to war and healing because of the belief that dogs licking your wounds will heal faster. There are some temples in England that were being discovered about the same time that Lovecraft was writing about Nodens for the first time. And Nodens is related to a Celtic god called Nuada, Nauada, Nauada, and that god is the original head of the Celtic pantheon that loses an arm and as a cripple cannot be head of the pantheon anymore and steps down. And so I came up with this idea that Nodens is the god of crippled warriors. That if you have lost a limb or an eye or are unable to be a warrior anymore, by taking on the worship of Nodens, Nodens will give you the opportunity to go to the Dreamlands. You'll dream deeply. And there in the Dreamlands, if you sacrifice the limbs you are missing in the waking world on an altar of Nada, cut your own legs off, cut out your eyes, whatever you're missing, lay them on that temple's altar, you will have the ability to have dream limbs in the waking world. When you serve Nodens on the mission of fucking with Nyarlathotep, you suddenly have these invisible limbs that nobody can see. If they grew back, everyone asked, why does Uncle Bobby have 2 legs again? But in this, you have these invisible limbs that don't leave fingerprints and don't leave footprints, maybe, that don't trip motion sensors or don't, pass through laser sensors, things like that. Bullets pass through them. So if we're using hit locations, shooting at the guy, shooting at the quadriplegic becomes a lot harder.
Yeah.
But he can pick up things and hit things, and he can put a glove over that invisible hand, and suddenly it appears to be okay.
Yeah.
And he can go and be whole and alive and have purpose and a mission and camaraderie and everything that warriors sort of crave. And so they are this cult that is made up of all these damaged individuals who are allowed to continue fighting. Maybe it wasn't the fight that they signed up for when they were in the Marines or the Army, but it is a fight nonetheless. And any fight will do sometimes when you've been sidelined and told that you're useless and you can't participate anymore and you don't have anything to contribute. So that's something that's moving forward that I'm working on that I'm really happy with. The last thing I would say is I've got a scenario I'm writing. We're going through edits right now, based on a whole lot of play tests. And the idea behind the scenario was originally to hand out a bunch of pre-generated characters, have them play out sort of the initial problem. Usually in Call of Cthulhu, there's a mythos event that is, and you go to that mythos event and you follow the clues and you check it out and you draw your conclusions from that event, having seen the wreckage left behind by whatever mythos eruption has happened. And what I wanted to do is take a page from episodic television. Episodic television always has this thing that happens before the credits.
Yeah.
The X-Files always give you a hint of what the problem's going to be. So does Supernatural and a couple other sort of investigative supernatural. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I guess, sort of did that a little bit, although not so much. Now that I think about it, they may have been one of the ones who didn't always telegraph the problem of the episode opening bit. But I wanted to do a thing where the players take these NPCs. They're the ones who open the wrong tomb. They're the ones whose drilling rig drills into the wrong thing. They're the ones who are there to summon the luck god so that they'll be lucky at whatever they want, and it all goes wrong. And depending on what happens in that event, then the players are suddenly left with the clues that action left behind. The original idea was the players play ISIS propaganda guys who are destroying some ancient artifacts and videotaping it for propaganda purposes. But they smash open the wrong thing and release something horrible, and they pay the price for it on camera. And then that camera, is somehow delivered into the hands of Delta Green, and what you have just played is what you watched on video. Now, all you have is this video. Go fix the problem. Determine where the videotape came from or whatever, and determine what you saw on the videotape, analyze the videotape, and whatever clues that the players drew as players, in the first sequence playing these pre-gens, that is then communicated to the players. I'm working on something similar involving an oil rig where the players, the surviving pre-gens, if there are any, could in fact be the witness that the players talk to, right? And say what they saw. And what I wanted to do that way is just sort of eliminate the kind of boring Q&A
Mm-hmm.
that can sometimes happen, and instead just sort of dynamically execute that initial clue gathering stage as the game itself. At least in certain situations, because sometimes Delta Green has the tendency to be a bit like responding to an incident, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much solving a mystery, but as it is sometimes, we have to respond to this thing that's happened, this outbreak or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm working on that for one scenario. I'm working on it for another, and those are both projects that are in the works. And the last project that's in the works is that I'm working on a campaign where the idea is the players will get to play Delta Green throughout the ages. They'll start off playing they'll play a scenario that's set before Delta Green exists.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then they'll play a scenario that's set basically after Innsmouth. So the Navy knows that there is such things as, this Innsmouth stuff.
Cool.
Then that'll move on to something that's set maybe during World War II, and you get to see sort of the glory days of Delta Green fighting the good fight against fascists and Nazis. And, you'll go to the 50s where it's Cold War, the 60s where maybe it's getting a little more messed up. I shouldn't say that, because the idea that the 60s are like this time period where America lost its innocence is baloney, because we never had any to start with. But you'll get to do an adventure that's set around the time that Delta Green is being disbanded.
Mm-hmm.
And if where you have to rescue a bunch of files that are going to be destroyed now that the agency has been disbanded, disavowed, and now it's being swept under the carpet. You have to rescue the files before they are burned in an incinerator or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on and the idea is that each game leading up to the present time is all about the same mythos problem. A mythos problem that, as each decade goes by and our technology actually grows, that threat becomes exponentially worse with each passing decade. And each game provides clues and information that the people in the next game will need to succeed. And you might be able to have a character be in like maybe one or two games, because they're separated by about a decade apiece. But ultimately, the idea is that you'll have to have new characters. You can't have the same guys the whole way through, because they'll just become so old that they can't really participate. That is to say, if they survive.
Yeah.
But this way, the players will maybe have a guy from the previous game will be, leading, the survivor from the last game will be leading the next team, and so on and so forth. And
very cool.
Depending on what clues they get and how much they risk themselves during the previous game, they will get better information to deal with the problem, and it'll build up over the course of that whole probably a century. I mean, what I'm looking at is literally a century of this, where it'll start maybe in 1919 and end at 2019.
Yeah.
So that is something else I'm definitely working on, and I guess at this point I have done. I've done the first two scenarios and play tested them. I've done one of the later scenarios, the 1970s one. And the 1981. There's a 1981 that's all about VHS tapes.
Oh, cool.
And the idea is that it's gonna a lot of the scenarios are gonna track media. Like it'll start about film, then it'll start about it'll be about film, it'll be about television, it'll be about VHS, time shifting, home recording, disseminating stuff onto VHS, beta, DVD, digital downloads until it's until the problem is on your phone.
Yeah.
and it can be disseminated to you, delivered to you, right to you, directly, personally. No more having to sit down in a darkened theater and be destroyed. You can be destroyed anywhere at any time, as long as you have cell coverage.
Nice.
People always say that cell phones ruin horror. Well, I aim to disabuse people of that notion.
Good. I'm excited about that. That's like one of the first things I have to do in modern horror RPGs is like just get rid of people's cell phones or be like, oh, there's a disturbance. The mythos messes up cell phones.
I'm going to make people. I want to make people smash their cell phone.
Good.
With a hammer and never look back. Spend 20 minutes in the game trying to find a motherfucking phone booth. God damn it! They used to be everywhere. I never even looked at. Now they're all gone.
Well, I live in a neighborhood that still has phone booths.
Kiosks, those little kiosks are actual phone booths.
No, the ones that are like half booths that are like up against the convenience store that you can't see inside because the windows are all cigarette ads.
Oh yeah, okay. Yep, I am familiar with those. I mean, you could change into Superman in there, but it would be very uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
So, regardless, that's cool. That's the deal.
Yeah.
That's what I'm working on at the moment, and that's what I'm hoping to see get done at the moment. So far, there hasn't been anything that we've come up with that has been like, no, you can't do that. There were some people who were hesitant with like, wait a minute, we're playing ISIS characters? And I'm like, don't worry. They're all going to die horribly. But when I had suggested to at one point that there's a team of Delta Green agents in New York who go to there's an island out in I want to say it's the East River.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's an island where it's kind of a potter's field, and there isn't a lot of potter's field stuff going on in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs at the moment.
Sure.
But what usually gets buried out there, the vast majority of burials are miscarriages.
Okay.
From people who just ran into, or rather I say women who ran into some sort of problem or trauma in their pregnancy, and the miscarriages are buried out there. The other thing that's buried out there is a lot of what they call biohazard waste, amputated limbs, amputated removed organs, cancerous organs that have been taken out, tumors, all kinds of stuff like that ends out on this one island out in, I think it's between the Bronx and Brooklyn out there.
Sure.
But I had this idea that when Delta Green is negotiating with the ghouls who live under New York, they're always a little hesitant about what, the ghouls want one thing, right? The ones under Manhattan have sort of exhausted the supply of graveyards in Manhattan, and they still need they still need the dead. So Delta Green always sends somebody to that island to intercept this stuff, because it's easier to transport an amputated foot or a couple of miscarried children in a valise across Manhattan, across New York, taking the ferry from the island and getting on the subway and then going down the access tunnel to the ghouls and say, okay, we got you, we brought you 10 kilograms like you asked. What can you tell us about the cult of Nodens? And the ghouls are like, well, I told you. And the benefit of bringing this sort of stuff is the ghouls can't learn anything.
Yeah.
It's not like you brought them a bunch of knowledge because they absorbed the knowledge of the dead. If you're bringing premature miscarriages, they know nothing. And there's not this problem of feeding the ghouls too much information. I mean, they don't even know. They won't even learn where this burial ground is. Heaven forbid they go there themselves. And when I suggested the idea of Delta Green agents on the subway with a valise packed with dry ice and miscarriages, going to feed them to the ghouls under New York. Dennis's response was not, "Oh my God, what the hell are you thinking? We can't print that." His thought was, or statement was, "That's very good. You get a gold star." And to have Dennis, who usually comes up with some of the most uncomfortable stuff, tell me that I got a gold star, that actually meant something. That felt good. Felt good to know that I had gone beyond the permissible. Because again, it is supposed to be, horror.
Yeah.
So we've got to come up with horrifying things. Hopefully we've got enough, warnings on the outside. Because someone who's had a miscarriage is probably not going to enjoy that part of the scenario. No. I would hope that whoever their game master is would crack open the book and go, "Oh, miscarriages, we're going to leave that part out and just go with the limbs." Just go with the cancerous liver or the amputated leg or something. We're just going to go with that part. I'm like, I would think, good, yes, that is the right answer. Just leave that part out if it's not, the right thing for that crowd, for goodness sake. But, John's come up with some stuff recently for the Labyrinth that is it's going to need some trigger warnings. It's definitely going to need some of those. It's got some truly nasty stuff. That is a not very subtle swipe at our 1%.
Yeah.
But it's quite nasty, but it's quite good.
Is this for Delta Green?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
John wrote some stuff recently. Delivered his manuscript complete finally. Labyrinth is designed to be basically how do I put this? He's got we had books where we'd have the one thing that was missing from the Delta Green books originally is when we would write up a cult, or we would write up a organization that is an opponent or even an ally to Delta Green. We failed to do one thing. We failed to demonstrate to some of the readers that these organizations are not meant to be permanent. Mm-hmm. I mean, people were sort of shocked that we didn't write up the Karatechia, the leftover Nazis from World War II, who are still practicing, mythos magic. We just sort of said, there won't be any more Nazis. We can just write these guys out. And clearly we were wrong. But the idea behind that group originally was Delta Green should totally kill these guys. You should be able to wipe these guys out while playing Delta Green, and then move on to a new problem that's harder to work out, like the Fate or Majestic 12. And we eliminated the Fate and Majestic 12 and the Karatechia, all from the first book, and came up with new things because we wanted to give players the opportunity to fight new cults. And what John's doing with the Labyrinth now, and I hope it's how we're going to present organizations in the future, is here's what the organization looks like before Delta Green has any contact with them. Here's how the organization changes because Delta Green has had contact with them, either because they're investigating them or they're blowing up their warehouses or they're assassinating their membership in the cult, And here's what the group's like when their back's up against the wall and Delta Green is winning. Okay. That way, people will understand that these groups are meant to be eliminated. They are meant to be destroyed. The mythos never goes away. Just some of the groups that are particularly human ones, or demi-human or semi-human ones that are in contact with it, they can be eliminated. You're not going to get rid of the Amigo, but you might eliminate Amigo Outpost or destroy Amigo Operation. That's fine. And we wanted to make sure that, this time people don't think that these things this setting is not set in stone. It should, or carved in stone. Yeah. The setting's not carved in stone. It should be constantly evolving as your players have successes. They should have successes, but the ultimate problem that this is the mythos's universe, not yours, never goes away. All right, that always produces the next incident, the next problem, the next atrocity, so I feel like this is a really great way to organize the setting and the organizations and these groups that we've come up with. I mean, we had a group of Shub-Niggurath cultists who were, sort of deeply involved in recruitment of children through foster care to create new cultists, because part of their weird fertility cult was to practice genital mutilation that would prevent them from ever having children. And the only source of fertility is Shub-Niggurath.
Yeah.
So there was this really, there's this nasty, child endangerment, child abuse aspect to the story. They're not meant to be permanent. They're meant for you guys to, the players to figure out and torch their shit and rescue those kids.
Yep.
Now, one of our writers came up with a way that the kids that you rescued from the Scopsy, the creepy Shub-Niggurath cult, the children you rescued from them are still damaged, and their damage is going to come back 20 years later to be a new problem. So, that's kind of what we're going for there. Again, you can have these victories, absolutely. But at the same time, there's always going to be another problem that's going to be created. So there.
I have a question, just because I love Tsathoggua. Tsathoggua is my go-to great old one. He's not much Tsathoggua in Delta Green. Is any plans for that, or?
Yeah, I do have plans for that. I have the scenario that's set on an oil rig.
Okay.
Is about Tsathoggua.
Because my next question is going to be: is it Lovecraft Tsathoggua, or is it Clark Ashton Smith's Tsathoggua?
Well, that's a darn good question. It's probably more Clark Ashton Smith Tsathoggua.
Okay.
Because it's set. The story is going to be set under Greenland.
Oh.
And it's going to involve the idea that as the ice sheet is pulling back off of Greenland, it is revealing the lost world of Hyperborea, that is where Clark Ashton Smith's stories took place. And as more of that is revealed, more fanes of Tsathoggua will be revealed. There is nobody necessarily on the surface of the earth who is worshiping Tsathoggua in a large organized way. There are beneath. I'm positing that beneath Greenland are the caves of Nakai.
Okay.
It's from the mound, and that was a center of Tsathoggua activity and the activity of the formless spawn. And setting it up in Greenland, gives us a couple of really good options up there. There's Thule Air Force Base. There's Nunavut Oil, which is the oil exploration organization for Greenland. There's the fact that there's only about 15,000 people on the whole place. There's all kinds of social things going on, like a really high suicide rate and a real serious cultural breakdown amongst the Nunavut, which is the perfect recruiting ground for cultists. If you've got a culture that's in crisis, hopefully it won't come off as that. What I'm worried about is, of course, is that standard Lovecraftian. Well, brown people can't be trusted. They'll go totally Cthulhu worshiping at the drop of a hat. I don't want to go that route, but I do want to acknowledge that because so much of the culture up there has been devastated by the contact with Denmark and the contact with Europeans, and no longer able to do the things that folks did up there, like the walrus hunts or the whale hunts or any of that stuff has been, sort of destroyed by the industrialized versions of that. That it has seriously affected those places, and again, in horrifyingly high levels of suicide amongst the teenage population. And my idea is that something will emerge from under the ice, and will sort of bring a message of power and actualization. And Tsathoggua is one of those deities that hands out a lot of magic, allegedly. It communicates pretty well, despite its alleged sloth. I guess maybe it communicates so it doesn't have to actually do anything. Maybe that's how the sloth works. But there's a lot of things about Tsathoggua that I want to use in this, and particularly get into there's a thing in the Mound where they talk about how Tsathoggua was a popular deity amongst the Kenyan until they realized something horrible about Tsathoggua, and then destroyed his idols, destroyed his temple, sealed off the caves of Nakai, so on and so forth. And I'm not, I've always not been quite sure what that is, but some of Clark Ashton Smith's stories talk about. There's one about the doom of Comorian, which involves the city being evacuated because a child of Tsathoggua or a devotee of Tsathoggua is unkillable because he's like the spawn of Tsathoggua on the inside. He cannot be killed by blade. He can only be hacked into pieces that reassemble themselves.
Yep.
And then he, continues to commit murder and cannibalism and arson and whatever other things he can do because he's now unstoppable. And so I imagine that the problem that the Kenyan backed away from was that because they left the surface world to prevent themselves from being genetically manipulated by the Migo to lose all their superpowers. They're humans that have not been mucked with by the Migo. We're the damaged, dumbed down, no longer dangerous humans to Migo. All right? So that they can operate on Earth with less trouble.
Pacified Shoggoth slough.
Yeah. And the idea being that the Kenyan may have pushed the worship of Tsathoggua away because it meant a pollution of their bloodline.
Okay.
By this that there is some sort of horrible mating between Tsathoggua and the spawn of Tsathoggua that communicates some of the god's genetic material or something. I actually had found somebody who suggested once, and I've clung to the idea that the spawn of Tsathoggua are actually the god's semen.
Yeah.
That it has intelligent, motile, dangerous spooge that goes and finds things to transfer its genetic material to, like us, just to make it extra gross. That's why the Kenyan cut off all contact, but there were still a few loyalists down there in the Hollow Earth who will emerge into Greenland and bring their new message of a powerful new people. Once you've been, once you've merged with the Godhead, your children will never know cold again. They'll never, they'll have superpowers. Who doesn't want superpowers? Things like that. Yes, Tsathoggua will definitely be making, if I can get to it and get through it, maybe next year I'll be able to play test some more of this. I've play tested the opening gambit on the oil derrick, but I haven't gotten into the part where the players have to go to Greenland and stick out like sore thumbs, in this tiny little isolated community and desperately try to keep this from moving from Greenland to, I don't know, an even more heavily populated place like Denmark or the mainland Europe or, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's crazy. That sounds really cool, Scott.
If it can get written, if I can get it done, it will be cool.
Nice. Very nice.
Well, so yeah, that's Zagwa does not. I'm hoping to give the old Toad some more love.
Good deal.
Just in the way he hopes to give you some more love. Although, I should I hesitate to gender any of my old ones. The idea that I'm calling Shub-Niggurath she and Cthulhu he seems really unnecessarily anthropomorphizing things that are so not anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. So that's that question, I guess. Well, anything else? What else you got from me?
Yeah. I have the question I have written down is any thoughts on August Derleth and his concept of the Cthulhu Mythos and how that kind of like led into role playing games and kind of like the whole idea of like a lot of us wouldn't be around right now if it wasn't for Derleth, even though we all kind of like dump on him for like his Lovecraftian pastiches and whatnot.
we absolutely, that's the thing, is that he does not get a lot of love from any number of writers today. You can always tell a Derleth completed story because it's like a wall of prose that just comes down, blam, oh, here's the part that August wrote, I can see where we've left Lovecraft country and we've moved into Derleth town. And it's not good. His idea of the four elements is defining the mythos. That does not work for me. It never did. It was always a kind of again, the four elements are a very human concept. The idea that these four elements define a universe that we can't even perceive, that we don't know what's going on in, that there are places where our physics don't work. So naturally, there should be water, air, fire, and earth on all these places around the universe that we haven't encountered. That always seemed like not the best idea. Yeah. On the other hand, when I was in Milwaukee, I went into the big public library in Milwaukee, and right there in the giant marble hallway entry areas, atrium, was this big wall that said something to the effect of great Wisconsin writers. And since it's alphabetical, and August comes before anybody else.
Sure.
There it is. There's August Derleth's name set into this white marble wall in brass, this big shiny brass. August Derleth, which is sort of amusing. And there is, in fact, an Arkham House collection at the library in the restricted books section. Which I tried to get to see because I wanted to see a Robert E. Howard story that I had not read, and I found they got the collection, the Black Man and Others, or the Dark Man and Others. I can't remember the title off the top of my head. But I go up there, and this librarian was like, well, I'm sorry, you can't see the in the restricted section. And I'm like, but you have to have a good reason. I was like, well, here's my business card. I work for Pagan Publishing. We're a publisher of weird fiction, sort of, and sort of cosmic horror and mythic Cthulhu Mythos stuff that Arkham House is all about. I was interested in seeing some of the books that have not been reprinted. And she's like, well, the books are very old and irreplaceable, and you would need special equipment in order to handle them. And at the time, I was taking care of a friend of mine up in Wisconsin who was dying, sadly, of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a stoma put in and a colostomy bag. And so I had helped them. I was helping them, change their colostomy bag.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a big Ziploc baggie filled with surgical gloves. So I just opened my satchel and I pulled out, well, I've got these surgical gloves. And she looks at me. And she looks at the gloves, looks at me and says, you'd need to be from an accredited, academic institution. And I'm like, what the fuck am I? Am I Wilbur Watley trying to use the fucking Necronomicon? Jesus Christ, I know I'm 6'6", but I don't, there's not tentacles squirming under my overcoat. It's, it's summer. I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts, all right? You can see that I don't have giant dinosaur legs or whatever. She was having none of that. She would not let me see the collection. But Derleth got a lot wrong, and he was a bit of a charlatan insofar as his claims to have the be in legal possession of the copyrights on so much of Lovecraft stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if he hadn't been a charlatan and he hadn't been a fanboy, we wouldn't have gotten any of it. I mean, he's not. Who's the guy who wrote A Gun for Dinosaur? That's the only thing I can ever remember he wrote. Let's see here. Gun for Dinosaur is L. Sprague de Camp, right? L. Sprague de Camp got into Robert E. Howard's work and was just a fucking vandal. Okay. He had written pastiches of Conan, and when he went into Robert E. Howard's work, he would change as his editor. When he was republishing stuff in the 60s, he would change the original Robert E. Howard story so that the continuity matched his pastiche, not the other way. Not the other way. He was a fucking vandal, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And took some shit for it, and should have. L. Sprague de Camp, for whatever his flaws, I am unaware of him going back and changing any of Lovecraft's stuff to match his pastiches. He did a pretty decent job of preserving this stuff.
Yeah.
And he brought it to everyone's attention. Now, his sparkly Cthulhu, I feel the same way about sparkly Cthulhu as I feel about sparkly vampires. Vampires should only sparkle if they're covered in white phosphorus. And I feel the same for Cthulhu. But was it the Chorison? I can't remember what he called the other Cthulhu.
Yeah.
But I'm not. No. How about no? His idea of good and evil fighting in the universe, that the elder gods are good and the old ones are bad, or the outer gods are bad, but they're these elder gods, and the elder sign is a good thing. No, I don't know that. I don't know about his effect on the creation of the role-playing game, except that if it wasn't for him, a lot of people wouldn't have had contact with this, and I don't think they would have the knowledge base to create the game. But they say explicitly, and Peterson, I think, says explicitly in Call of Cthulhu, we're not going with the Derlethian Lovecraft. We're not going with I want to say it's not Michael Moorcock. Trying to remember the guy who wrote the Titus Crow books.
Brian Lumley. Yeah,
Lumley has a couple times where you get the nuke Cthulhu in some of his stories, and possibly punch him in the face with psychics. Sure, all the psychics die, but they are people off screen that you never get to meet or know, so it's no big deal. That sort of stuff is a bit too four-color for me. It's a bit too pulp for me. At least for what I think makes for the good role-playing game.
Sure.
But I can't bash Lumley because I mean, it's easy, but why would you? I mean, he made this stuff available to us, and I'm just grateful for that. And besides, he has the world's coolest writing desk. Have you seen Brian?
No.
August Derleth. There's a picture of August Derleth online you can find of him sitting at this insane sort of semicircular writer's desk.
Oh, yeah. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, that is a cool desk.
Oh, that is a cool desk.
That is a cool desk.
He did that right. I mean,
yeah.
Credit where credit is due, August. But his vision of a almost level playing field is inappropriate, I would think, for the kind of for cosmic horror. So it doesn't quite work as translated. I don't think it works quite as well when translated into this sort of role playing game that Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green, for that matter, have become.
Sure. Yeah, no, one thing that I was thinking about with Derleth, though, is he, like, took a lot of different people's stuff and kind of, like... Oh, man, was that Derleth that did that? It's like,
Derleth, I think,
he kind of took a bunch of people's stuff and smashed it all together and was like, it's the mythos.
He is the guy who's supposed to... He's like that nerd who wants to bring order out of the chaos of writers.
Yeah.
Who are just, where he's bringing in... Henry Neuter and what's his name from the Space Eaters and the Hounds of Tantalus.
Frank Belknap Long.
Yeah, he's bringing in Long and throwing them into the soup, and bringing the Robert E. Howard stuff in, and I think he's also responsible for smooshing Robert W. Chambers' King in Yellow stuff into the mythos.
Yeah.
When it was all just these various strains of weird fiction writers writing their weird fiction, much less and of course trying to square, all the hexagons of Lovecraft's work so it's all fitting together into one universe that is consistent. I mean, that is all Derleth. None of this was supposed to fit together. These were just. This is just it wasn't even a mixing pot. It was a spice rack full of things that Lovecraft could reach up to and, pull off. This story needs a reference to the Necronomicon. I think I'll name drop Cthulhu here.
Yeah.
While I'm going on to doing something completely different, in the story. And so, this stuff was not necessarily. This stuff was not meant necessarily to be mixed all together.
Yeah,
but it has, and it's okay. It really is. It's just things were maybe did not turn out the way we imagined. But anyways, that's where we're at. And that is part of that is certainly that aspect of Derleth is sort of interesting because we wouldn't have any number of things included in this. We wouldn't have, the Star Vampire from the Shambler from the Stars if Derleth hadn't, reprinted, what's his name from Psycho?
Robert Bloch.
Bloch's story on. These would not be part of the mix necessarily. And that aspect of bringing together all these various threads, that's something, we owe him for that. We absolutely owe Derleth for that because it was a good start. And people have continued doing that, ever since. Michael Shea's The Autopsy got mixed in, to the mix, and various other sort of weird cosmic horror fiction has landed there as well. And it is to the advantage of the gamer to have all this stuff brought together for them and handed to them on a platter. Nowadays it's even easier to get at the original stories. I remember having used bookstores and hunting around for some old, 60s pulp paperbacks.
Yeah.
If I could find, Henry Nuda's story, or Clark Ashton Smith, or Belcamp Long,
Uh-huh.
But now it's very much at our fingertips, which is still which is cool.
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about. I still got to gripe about weak otakus, that they didn't. You kids don't know what it was like. We had to walk uphill in the snow to get our Lovecraft. But I don't necessarily mean it. I'm perfectly happy not to work as hard because I'm old now and I'm lazy.
Oh yeah.
Certainly, John Crow got me on this kick of not every mythos sorcerer is competent at their job.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of times where these guys are just starting out. They haven't really become a problem yet. And then, it's not so much a question of them stopping them from taking over their world. It's just you're worried about the size of the crater they're going to leave when they screw up, and how many people end up being taken out as collateral damage. How do you limit that?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's a lot of that.
Rather than saving the world, it's like, they don't really know what they're doing, but they know just enough to be really dangerous.
Yeah.
There was some early old Call of Cthulhu stuff where you'll find different races and different cults all working seamlessly together.
Yeah.
In these kind of mythos hoedowns, to get the humans. And I always thought, why do they care? Why do any of them care? Why are they working together? Why is it so important to get the humans? I would think they would just be like, well, they're likely to nuke each other before long eventually. Why do we care?
Yeah.
Just sit back on the couch and and let them take care of themselves. But yeah, I've never been a big fan of various mythos factions having an easy time cooperating. So that's 100% for that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I and it's like concepts of like several state or country or worldwide cults. It's like, well, there might be a handful. There might be a handful of this particular cult in this part of the world, but they're probably not going to know each other, and they're probably going to be afraid of the fact that it's like, oh, they have that. Are they trying to lure me out? I'm a paranoid cultist.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, they're already policing their membership. Their own membership is filled with guys who joined cults, and if you joined my cult, if you join my cult, then who knows how many other cults you've joined. And that's typical of really every one of these classic sort of secret societies.
Yeah.
Whether it's the Masons or, the Rosicrucians or, any of these other groups, you'll find guys who are in multiple versions. I mean, Crowley was constantly creating and inventing groups to join. Mm-hmm. Because he kept getting kicked out of the groups he was in, and they have long lists of organizations that these people are parts of. So the idea that you find out that one of the guys in your Hastur cult is also in the esoteric order of Dagon, and he's also a member of Majestic 12, and is in these Prior of Zion, and possibly of Rosicrucian and the Templar, and oh shit, it just keeps going.
Something brand new called the Yellow Thule Society, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah, they just turned up. They're really cool though. I really like. They have great meetings.
Really cool hats too.
Oh, the hats are the best. The hats are the best. Yeah, exactly. And the idea that would somehow change because, well, we're real cultists. We're not.
No, and a lot of times I really kind of think of my cultists in like my RPGs or stories as like, it's like the kind of assholes that would like surround Labatsky or Crowley, and like the kinds of people that like Arthur Machen was like wanting to hang out with and hanging out with and stuff like that. And it's like, what are their motivations? How would they actually, if like a bunch of jackasses in suits and shotguns come running into your like parlor, what do you do? It's like, and it's how do they? How would you really react?
Well, gone for the most part is the age of the frothing cultists of
Yeah.
Masks of Hotep, or the cult out in the bayous in the original Call of Cthulhu.
Uh-huh.
The problem, you're more likely to have a problem where the cultists will call their lawyer,
Uh-huh.
Or even the cops call
Yeah.
the cops on you, as the guys who broke into their house, and suddenly you're doing a nickel upstate because you broke into the guy's house, and sure, he's got a bunch of funny eye in the pyramid covered in tentacles statues in the house, but ain't no law against that, buddy. Off
Yeah.
you go, upstate.
And recently I was thinking about, like, I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and, like, people getting, like, maybe put in jail when they shouldn't have been put into jail, and, like, crooked cop stuff, and thinking about, like, what if a bunch of cops in, like, Delta Green, like, in the Delta Green universe, like, start seeing stuff over and over again, and they're like, hey, you know what? This could be an extra way to make money.
Well,
Crooked cop cultist types.
I have no doubt that Delta Green agents back in the day when they were unfunded was like, couldn't help but notice this pile of drug dealer money.
Yeah.
Sure would make operations easier if we had some disposable cash. I mean, and I could use a bass boat. I mean, right? That's not a bad thing. I mean, we're risking our lives here doing this hard work. I guess we could take the gold or the, whatever it is, the adamantium or whatever, object that they've got, or worse, some occult item that they're like, couldn't we just put this up for auction? And then they find out it's something they should never have put back into circulation because, absolutely. Again, moral choices is what Delta Green is supposed to be about.
Oh, yeah.
More than anything else. What prices are you willing? What prices and corners are you willing to cut to save the world?
Exactly.
And how do you look at yourself in the mirror afterwards when you're done? There's that old Night Vale line, I guess we could sort of semi-adopt, which was, if you see something, call A-Cell and then drink to forget.
I think that's a good note to go out on.
All right, fair enough. Bent your ear for well over an hour.
Oh, yeah.
So let's all right. Let's sign off. I will be available anytime you want to do this again. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, thank you again so much for being on the show. And yeah, people love having you on the show. I love having you on the show. And honestly, it's just great to listen to you talk about gaming. So.
Well, for the podcast, I mean, you just put a nickel in me and I'll run my mouth and boom, you've got an hour worth of material. 2 hours even.
Good deal.
It's super easy.
Next time I'll have you tell gaming stories. I always love hearing those kind of things. Thanks again, Scott. Thank you so much for being on the show and talking to us about space monsters, cultists, and all kinds of fun stuff. Ken and Scott, check out the show notes to find out where you can find out more about Delta Green and projects that they're working on in the future. And, they're available on social media just like everybody else. Check them out. Follow them. They've always got good stuff going on. So thank you again for listening to People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, or Black Clock Audio Tales, or whatever episode you want to pretend this is. This has been special episode number 10, I'm going to call this. So, all right. Tomorrow, more August Derleth. Well, actually, it's technically H.P. Lovecraft, but collected and edited by August Derleth, because we're doing a recreation of The Outsider and Other Stories by Arkham House. So it's August Derleth, Arkham House August, and later this month we're going to have some actual August Derleth. We're going to have some Don Wandry, because Don Wandry was part of the Arkham House collective and, was helped founded it with August Derleth, unless I'm completely wrong and someone can correct me. Thank you so much. Have a good day.